What if the biggest controversy surrounding the Indiana Fever right now isn't the foul that started it all, but the relationship sitting behind the coach's reaction to it? Because when DiJonai Carrington was ejected after a Flagrant 2 against Sophie Cunningham, most people expected one thing from Fever coach Stephanie White: protect her player. Instead, White spent part of the aftermath explaining why she didn't believe Carrington meant to hurt Cunningham. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about one hard foul. It became a question about loyalty, leadership, race, and a coaching relationship that goes back 2 full seasons. Then Stephen A. Smith jumped into the conversation, and his criticism turned the temperature up even higher. But here's where the story gets more complicated, because the evidence doesn't support the easiest version of the outrage. White didn't argue that the officials got the call wrong. Cunningham didn't accuse White of betrayal. And Caitlin Clark actually defended her coach after Fever fans booed her. So what really happened here, and why has this one play turned into one of the WNBA's biggest controversies of the summer? It started with a breakaway and a decision that officials didn't need much time to make. Sophie Cunningham was attacking the basket when DiJonai Carrington came from behind and made heavy contact during the play. Cunningham went down, the officials reviewed what happened, and the foul was upgraded to a Flagrant 2. That meant Carrington was ejected. The league's explanation focused on the contact being unnecessary and excessive against a player in a vulnerable position. In other words, whatever anyone thought about Carrington's intentions, the officials had already made their judgment about the action itself. And that distinction matters, because this story quickly became a debate over something nobody outside Carrington could actually know for certain. What was going through her mind when she made the play? The footage can show the contact. The officiating decision can establish the penalty, but it can't magically reveal intent. That's where the argument began splitting into 2 completely different conversations. And then Carrington made the decision that changed the entire story. After the ejection, she posted "white privilege" while tagging the Indiana Fever. Suddenly, the controversy wasn't simply about whether a Flagrant 2 was appropriate. Now people were debating whether race had influenced the officiating or the league's reaction. Cunningham pushed back publicly, saying she didn't believe race had anything to do with what happened and pointing out that she herself had previously been ejected for a comparable play. That response mattered because it came directly from the player who had taken the contact. Cunningham wasn't asking everyone to pretend the foul was nothing. She accepted that the league had handled the basketball incident. Her objection was to turning that particular play into a racial. What if the biggest problem in the Stephanie White controversy isn't actually the foul that started it? What if it's the history between the Fever coach and the player who committed it? Because when DiJonai Carrington was ejected after a brutal Flagrant 2 against Sophie Cunningham, Fever fans expected their coach to immediately stand behind her own player. Instead, Stephanie White defended Carrington's competitive mentality and questioned whether the foul was intentional. That decision sent the internet into a frenzy, got White booed by her own fans, and brought Stephen A. Smith directly into the argument. But there's one part of this story that makes the entire situation far more complicated. White isn't just familiar with Carrington. She coached her for 2 full seasons in Connecticut. And once that connection became impossible to ignore, fans started asking a very uncomfortable question. Was White giving Carrington the benefit of the doubt because she knew exactly what kind of player she was? Or was everyone else simply misreading what the coach was actually trying to say? The controversy began during a Fever game when Sophie Cunningham took off toward the basket on a fast break. With Cunningham heading toward the rim, Carrington came from behind and made heavy contact. Cunningham went down, the officials reviewed the play, and the call was upgraded to a Flagrant 2. Carrington was ejected from the game. That decision was important because it established the official view of the incident. The league determined that the contact was unnecessary and excessive against a player in a vulnerable position. So there was no debate about whether the officials considered the play serious. They did. But basketball fans immediately started debating something officials can never completely determine from replay: intent. Did Carrington deliberately try to hurt Cunningham? Or was she attempting to stop a fast break and simply went too far? Those are 2 very different accusations. The footage can show the contact. It can show the speed of the play. It can show where Carrington's arm went. but it can't tell you exactly what was in her head. And that distinction became the foundation of Stephanie White's defense. Because White eventually admitted that the play was egregious. She wasn't claiming the foul should have been ignored. She wasn't arguing that Carrington deserved to stay in the game. What she questioned was the idea that Carrington intentionally tried to injure Cunningham. White described Carrington as an extremely competitive defender who wasn't going to allow somebody to simply walk into the lane uncontested. To White, being physical and being malicious were not the same thing. But to Fever fans watching their player hit the floor, that explanation sounded completely different. Imagine watching one of your players take a dangerous hit, then hearing your head coach spend part of the post-game conversation explaining why the opposing player wasn't TR.